Michelle.
And I'm Lucy.
Welcome to another Cameo episodes. These short episodes will be slotted in between the other ones and will cover people who made a fleeting yet tantalizing appearance in other episodes. We don't always have a lot of information about them, so they can't have a full episode of their own, but they are too interesting to abandon completely, and they fill in the gaps and enable us to create as full a picture of the era as we can.
And today, Thomas Nandyke.
Nandyke. I'm thinking Van Dyke.
He was sometimes known as Van Dyke because he probably came from a Flemish family. But
okay.
He's generally known, I don't know whether we couldn't say Van Dyke or what, but we've gone for Nandyke. So.
Well, hey, Giovanni gets changed to John.
Yes.
We don't seem to keep our names.
Yes, and Machado's, his name was Reese or something, wasn't it? And he got changed to Roger.
Yes. Yeah.
They just picked them out of a hat. I came across Thomas Nandyke when I was researching John Morton's episode. I mentioned him, but just in passing. Richard III accused Morton of employing Thomas Nandyke to poison him.
Right.
When Buckingham, Morton and Nandyke had been holed up in Brecon, and when Morton was supposedly Buckingham's prisoner. But we weren't quite sure about that.
No.
I wonder if he made Buckingham cry like he did with the French ambassador.
Oh, maybe. Sat there scolding him until he started to cry. Okay, I'll let you go.
Yes. All right, I'll start a rebellion.
Yeah.
It seems odd for a man from the nobility to have his own pet necromancer and astrologer, which was what
creepy.
Nandyke was to Buckingham.
Okay, necromancer at the time, does that mean just speaking with the dead? Because necromancer now means you were raising the dead.
Yes, it just means conversing with the dead. Yes.
Having a little chat.
Yes.
Not raising zombies.
Not creating a zombie army, no.
Okay, good.
No.
Still
Which is
creepy.
Well, Buckingham might have won if they'd got a zombie army, I suppose.
He would have definitely won. The superstition of the time, everybody just would have scattered and fled England. It would have been like watching rats jump off of docks when there's a fire.
Maybe that's the revisionist point of this episode. Perhaps they all got drowned in the River Severn, because, I don't know, can zombies swim? I don't know.
But do they need to breathe, though, so then they wouldn't have to drown?
Well, they might get whooshed downstream.
Oh, yeah. Would they float?
Depends how many bits were missing and holes in them, I suppose. Anyway, I'm beginning to think we've got slightly sidetracked here.
Very.
Because Nandyke was probably also Buckingham's physician and confessor. So it's an odd collection: physician, confessor, astrologer, and necromancer.
Yeah. So after he dies, he can scream at Nandyke, and Nandyke can hear it.
Yes.
Awesome.
The dark arts and religion seem to have been able to live quite happily within the same person.
Which makes no sense to me still.
But not a lot of the Tudors is making much sense to me.
No.
Not a lot at all. In fact, many occultists were members of the clergy, and medicine and astrology were natural bedfellows since the humours in the body were related to the action of the stars and planets, as we've seen, although we don't necessarily believe. We first hear of Nandyke in 1476, studying medicine at Cambridge.
Oh, so he's actually educated.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Very, very.
Oh.
Yeah, necromancers weren't weird people in sort of rat-infested cloaks with straggly hair. And they were, yes, at this stage, they were all highly educated people.
Really? That doesn't seem to go hand in hand with me. If you're educated, you should know that you can't speak to the dead.
Yes, I would agree with that, but different times. We don't hear about him because he won Best Essay Prize or anything like that. We hear of him because he owed 20 shillings to one of the proctors. But that's quite often how we get information about people, isn't it? Because if they never owe money and they never get into trouble, They slip between the cracks of history, so...
Yeah, you have to be annoying in some way for people to write you down.
Yes. Yeah, if you're completely bland, you will never get heard of again.
Yeah, like me with this podcast. Nobody would know I existed if it didn't exist.
Yes.
Hello.
Hello, is anybody out there? Often medical degrees were taken quite late, after the student had already studied a broader curriculum.
Which makes sense. Isn't there pre-med and med now?
Yep.
At least there's in Canada.
But pre-med, what would that involve?
Oh, goodness. Biology, chemistry. There's a couple of... I don't know because I'm not a medical student. I can ask my neighbor. He's a doctor.
Well, this broader curriculum meant that physicians could also take on roles as accountants and administrators for their lord.
Oh, dear. Okay, so not physical. Not the physical sciences.
Oh, no.
Something completely unrelated. I'm going to learn accounting, and I'm going to be a doctor.
Well, yeah.
Okay.
I think it's rather good that... I mean, that's why all these people can do so much. It's because the curriculum is so broad. Now, it's got smaller and smaller and smaller.
Yeah, until you're like needle or laser focused.
Yes, or you're only looking at people who lived between 1485 and 1509, for instance.
Yeah, it's just a very specific, tiny time frame. Oop.
The academic course in medicine at Cambridge was largely text-based. And as we've seen, they often went with the text rather than what was in front of their eyes.
Yeah, because they weren't allowed to do bodies yet.
Well, to counteract that, I presume, it was also required that students do a further 2 years practical physicianing before they could graduate.
And they did it under another physician? Or by themselves and just, hey, I've decided. This is what it is. You died. That's okay. Everybody's going to die anyway.
Well, you've done your text-based doctoring. And then you're sent out to say, here you go, you've read the books. Now go and make people better.
But I'm hoping under somebody else, like a residency or something.
I'm not sure.
Oh, goodness.
You'd like to think so.
Yes. Yes, I would.
It's possible that the Duke of Buckingham might have funded Nandyke's tuition. We've no evidence of that, as many of Buckingham's papers have been lost, but it was common for nobles ensuring that they get the best educated physician by ensuring that they were able to complete their training.
Yeah, that was patronage. You put them through whatever you needed so that they ended up working for you. Yeah.
And on the continent, apparently, it was quite common for students to drop out of medical courses because they hadn't got patronage in place there in the same way. So I think we found the one thing that England was better at than the continent this time. There it is.
Getting education.
Enjoy it. It won't happen again.
No, from now on you're on your own.
Now, you would think that having been accused of trying to poison Richard III would put Nandyke in prime position to romp up the Tudor greasy pole. But that doesn't seem to have been the case. It may be that Nandyke lacked the continental training that had become trendy. Because another Cambridge student who had the continental training, John Argentine, got the plum job of physician to Prince Arthur. And to show how broad the curriculum was for a medical student at Cambridge, in 1470, Argentine gave an oration on the subject of grammar, rhetoric and logic. Geometry, perspective, arithmetic, music...
That's not very broad. Oh dear.
Astronomy, the natural sciences, medicine and moral and metaphysical philosophy. In one oration, he covered all those.
How long would that have taken?
I don't know. People must have had quite a bit more stamina in those days, I think.
6 hours later, everybody gets up except for one guy who died during the presentation.
It sounds like one of Castro's speeches.
Yes.
Henry was very prompt to reverse the attainder against Nandyke, so we don't get the feeling that he's blotted his copybook with Henry. It's possible Nandyke just opted for the quiet life. He'd rebelled twice against Richard III, that time with Buckingham.
Yep.
And then later at Colchester, after which he was outlawed. After which it's assumed he must have sought refuge with Henry Tudor in Brittany, since it would have been too dangerous for him in England. So, unnerving time, It'd be quite understandable if he thought, no, I've had enough.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to the quiet of the university cloisters.
Where I'm not going to be hurt.
Yes, even if it does mean a drop in income.
Yeah, we'll just have very large academic fights.
Yes.
Sniping at each other through letters.
Yes, yes. Which is almost worse in a way sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah, but fun to read.
Yeah. I guess that since he wasn't able to predict the outcome of the Buckingham Rebellion, maybe his standing as an astrologer must have plummeted a bit there. Although people who believe such things are quite good at shutting their eyes to their failures, aren't they?
Yes. Well, all he has to say is, oh, you didn't tell me you were born at this hour or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's your fault, not mine.
Also, maybe he did predict it correctly and no one took any notice of him because they wanted to do it, which is...
Yeah. I told you.
People hear what they want to hear. He was 5th on the list of those attainted following the Buckingham Rebellion, showing that he was definitely one of the big guns. And he was described on that as a necromancer, which is the name for it in those days. He and Buckingham, Morton and 2 others were accused that they, quote, falsely and traitorously, as false traitors and rebels, intended, conspired, imagined and compassed the death of Rich III, unquote. So, very dangerous stuff.
Yes.
And absolutely true.
Yes.
That's precisely what they were doing.
We want him gone.
Much of what we know about Nandyke, which is depressingly little, comes from the inventory taken after his death, which is what makes us think he just went back to university and kept his head down. Because,
yeah, otherwise we would have had more about him. Somebody would have gotten him in trouble.
Yes. Physicians were advised to dress soberly so as to bring some gravitas to their profession.
Oh dear, was he wearing hot pink?
I think I thought you were going to say hot pants from...
No, I'm not sure what hot pants are.
Oh, in the 70s, tiny shorts. And sometimes they were in that sort of wet look, plasticky material. Yeah, ABBA, hot pants.
Yes. Gotcha.
Anyway, no, he wasn't wearing hot pants. But they were told to dress like clergymen and not like minstrels. So not like ABBA. But Nandyke obviously took no notice of this advice. In the inventory, we read of doublets of silk of diverse colours, another of Prussian leather, a green medley cap lined with velvet with matching cloak, 3 short gowns coloured blue, tawny and mulberry, and gowns trimmed with fox, lamb and squirrel and lined with some very luxurious fabrics, and 2 green gowns of oriental silks. Which
he had a lot of clothing.
A lot of clothes, yeah. He was obviously into his clothes.
He was also very wealthy to have that much clothes.
Precisely, yes.
Wow. Especially when you're talking about squirrel and fox,
and silk.
Yeah, well, the furs are a good indication because the smaller the animal, the more expensive that fur was because he had to stitch it all together. It wasn't taking like a long strip of fur. Yeah. That's why ermine was so expensive. The white with black spot fur that you see on royal cloaks and stuff are sometimes up to hundreds of the ermines because they're so small. So they are ridiculously expensive because of that. Just the labor to treat that many little tiny items. So yeah, that's an expensive addition to a cloak. Wow. Where did he get his money?
He must have had money when he was with Buckingham.
He must have.
We discover that by his death he was living in considerably reduced circumstances. I think that some of those clothes must have been looking quite shabby by that point.
Oh, okay. Surprised he didn't sell them.
Well, that's why we know he was in reduced circumstances. He sold a lot of things. Maybe he was so attached to his clothes. They just spoke to him of... Well, I was going to say better days. It wasn't better days because it was under Richard III and he hated him. But more prosperous days. But yeah, when they were new, these clothes, they must have given that portrayal of wealth and success that a physician needed if he was to prosper.
Maybe.
At least that would be the case if you were to be a physician to the fabulously rich. Any lower down the social scale than that, and dressing to impress was distinctly frowned upon.
Yes.
It was often satirised because you were seen as wealth taken from the sick and vulnerable.
Oh dear, this is another one of those. I read it on one side and I thought I really need to make a note of this. And it was all about people mocking how people were dressing because they weren't dressing to their station. And it was bringing their own reputations down. Jeez, where was that?
They were
also laughing at one particular man who wasn't a clergyman, like he wasn't a monk, but he was also, not only did he dress like a monk, he walked like a monk.
Oh.
And they had particular walks. Every station, I learned in that book, has a different type of walk. Monks were supposed to walk with this certain cadence that was excessively slow. And he was doing that as well as dressing like a monk. What book
Columbus dressed as a monk as well when he came back to Spain.
He did not deserve it.
He wasn't a monk. He dressed as a monk.
Wow, no. Oh my gosh. I'm actually nervous about that episode.
Yeah. It's going to be, I'm trying to work out, I'm not sure whether this will be before or after the 1492 mini-series that's coming up. The books I have for it, I measured, and they were 1.5 feet high, or thick.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Okay. I'm thinking it might have been Ruth Goodman's How to Be a Tudor book. And yes, she was not talking about Henry. Even she didn't talk about Henry VII. It was later. But I think it was her book. Sorry, I've just read 8 books. I'm not sure which one it was in. Anyway, moving on.
So they were complaining about people dressing down, not dressing...
Dressing up. Monks were still high respect. Oh, right. They may not have money, but they were still more respectful than a regular, say, townsman or villager, more specifically. But that's where I learned that everybody had a different walk. There was a courtly walk. There was a monk's walk. Everybody walked slightly differently, and you weren't supposed to mimic that either. And I didn't know about that till just now.
No.
I've got to find that again.
Different world. The proper colours for a medical man were blood red and grey, because the Chaucer's physician in the Canterbury Tales wore blood red and grey.
Okay.
And that was more or less a uniform. People would recognise you from the colour.
I'm thinking of a barber pole now, and I'm assuming that's not what it looked like.
No, I don't think he had a sort of spirally outfit. He's not that much of a dandy.
Wandering around like a candy cane.
Well, Nandyke did own his own sanguine gown trimmed with grey squirrel, so an expensive one. So, yeah, he was following the rules for that. He also had a glass to look in and 2 hairbrushes.
A glass to look in?
Well, I suppose it's like a mirror.
Oh, a mirror?
Yeah, but it was described as a glass
to look
in.
Yes, got it.
And he had a lute. So, despite the advice,
he
probably did look more like a minstrel than a clergyman. He didn't have much in the way of jewels in his inventory, and seeing how much he spent on clothes, you'd think he might have had quite a few. So
unless he pawned those
it implies
first?
That he's pawned and sold them, yeah.
Right.
Some of his books were being held by other people as collateral to cover various loans.
Oh dear. I wonder what happened.
Well, I'm assuming he just... maybe he was bad with money. People sometimes are. Maybe he had... he got all his money back after he was tainted. I don't know.
Didn't find another patron or couldn't get a job. Well, Henry wasn't too fond of hiring just anybody.
No, and he might have gone back to university and taught. Yeah,
teachers do not make a lot of money. That would make sense. He became a professor.
Yeah, well, also the fact that the inventory also contains 55 pounds of lead, a melting ladle, 2 chalk stones, a handsaw, a fire rake, hatchets, shovels, charcoal, various basins, pans, glass vessels, and warming dishes have led people to believe that he actually threw over medicine to take up alchemy. And there's not a lot of money in alchemy unless you've got the royal patronage, but even then that wears off once you fail to deliver.
Yeah, what a spade. What are you digging up? Do I want to know what you're digging up? I don't think so.
But there was such a close connection between alchemy and medicine that I can see no reason to assume he gave up medicine to take up alchemy. I mean, it's perfectly capable of doing both.
Yeah.
In fact, there was an alchemical cure for Henry VI's mental problems, as well as medical ones, so it's all much for muchness. The last part of his inventory comes under titles such as Stuff Sold to Master Principal, Stuff Sold to Master Wardle of St. Catherine's, Stuff in Keeping of Master White of Cambridge. So it's obviously he'd been having to get rid of his stuff for quite some time, I think.
Right.
Well, sadly we know very little about Nandyke. I could only find one article about him, but I thought we could use him to look at necromancy in general at this time. And Wikipedia says, quote, necromancy is the practice of magic involving communication with the dead by summoning their spirits as apparitions or visions for the purpose of divination, imparting the means to foretell the future and discover hidden knowledge, unquote.
Why do we think that dead people have the answer to the future? Where does that come from? Because they're dead.
I suppose the assumption is they got a direct line to God once they got out of purgatory.
So you think that you're only pulling people from heaven? Are you allowed to take people out of heaven?
I'm not sure.
St. Peter's at the gate saying, I don't think so. This is a one-way only.
Yeah, I'm not sure they think it through very, very much, really.
If you're in heaven, do you really want to be irritated by somebody asking you for the future? And is that heaven for you?
I haven't got a future. I'm in heaven.
Yes.
Don't bother me.
That's very strange logic.
We've wondered how people were able to get away with necromancy and astrology at this time when interest in witches was just becoming such a big thing. Were they not taking a big risk? Attitudes have been changing since the medieval period. In the early Middle Ages, necromancy was condemned by the Church as maleficium. And we came across maleficium in the Malleus Maleficarum.
Yes.
It's
evil.
Bad magic.
Yes.
Sometimes the conjuring up of spirits involved hallucinogenic plants such as nightshade, henbane or mandrake.
Okay, all of those
should
are
be taken
poisonous.
in moderation, yes.
Why not find magic mushrooms?
Yeah.
Those are hallucinogens that you have a much greater tolerance for. Do you have magic mushrooms in?
Yeah, we do, yeah.
Okay.
I haven't got any, I hasten to add. But
I actually don't even know what they look like.
They're little, and they've got a little nipple on the top. That's how you tell them.
Oh, okay. The only mushroom that I can 100% identify is the Amanita muscara, which looks like the little Mario Kart mushroom. It's white on the bottom, and it's got a red top with white dots. That's it. That's the only mushroom I know.
What about puffballs? Do you get puffballs
I don't know.
in Canada? Huge, huge things.
Jason tells us we had morels growing in our yard this year, and he ate them, and he didn't die, so I'm assuming he was right.
Yeah, we always have
delicious.
puffballs because they're really nice. You just cut them up and fry them. Anyway, this has been very much an episode of Sidetracking.
Every once in a while we get like this. Other times we're focused.
Strangely, given the Church's condemnation, many of the practitioners were, as I said, clergymen, who at that time would have been really taking a risk. However, by the early modern period, there had been a change in attitude to necromancy. So by the Elizabethan period, they were being employed by the court.
By the Queen.
By the Queen. And as we've seen, Buckingham had one. Whether he employed him as a necromancer or whether he was just doing necromancy on the side, I'm not sure.
I am hiring you as my ewer, okay? Wink, wink.
Yeah, you're to do the accounts, and that's all we'll talk about.
Yes.
Henry IV was the first king to apply the statute of treason to magicians in 1404.
How do you go from somebody doing something you think is silly to it is treasonous and you will die? What was he saying? That they were trying to kill him?
Yes, but then that was illegal whether he did it by magic means or not,
Yeah.
really. Although even Henry IV employed a French astrologer to detect plots against him. But he tried to discredit Owen Glendour with accusations of sorcery, so nothing new under the sun.
No.
Henry V made it illegal to practice alchemy without a licence.
So he licensed people?
He licensed alchemists. But he was fascinated by astrology as well, so... During Henry VI's regency, one of his uncles, Humphrey, Duke of Gloucester, created a court at Greenwich which became a hub for astrological study. Now, Humphrey's wife, Eleanor Cobham, was very keen to find out whether she would conceive a son and whether he would become king, because Humphrey was the heir presumptive.
Oh.
She asked 2 astrologers who were closely linked with Humphrey's court not only whether she would bear a son, but whether Henry VI would die. Well, presumably when, rather than whether.
But you're not allowed.
Yeah. Both astrologers and Eleanor Cobham were arrested for treason.
Yeah.
Yeah, not what you should do. Eleanor first sought sanctuary in Westminster Abbey and then agreed to come out but insisted on an ecclesiastical court so she could avoid the death penalty. And interestingly, the prosecution's method was not to condemn the astrologers, but to get a rival horoscope drawn up which pointed out mistakes in the first one.
Wow.
And which showed that Henry VI would live to a ripe old age.
Wow.
Yeah. And would in no way succumb to pure displeasure and melancholy. He might get bashed on the back of the head, though. This may seem as if the authorities were obsessed with winkling out occultists, but it's probably more likely that if a rival faction hadn't wanted to take Humphrey out of the running for the crown, maybe no one would have been too bothered about what Eleanor and the astrologers were up to. There is nearly always a political angle. And there was talking about the supernatural. There was also a rumour that Henry VI's son, Edward, the one we don't like, was a fairy changeling.
Right.
That was presumably a way of doubting that the boy was Henry's without blatantly accusing Margaret of Anjou of adultery.
Oh, we need to find his body and do genetic testing.
Okay.
I want to know who your dad is.
I wonder who you get in touch with for that sort of thing. You can't just go and do it yourself.
No, and as I understood it, the king has to approve anything that has to do with a royal personage. And
yes,
since he
like
was
the
a
Princess
royal
in the
person,
Tower.
yeah, and technically he was a royal personage.
He was, yeah. Prince of Wales.
No,
Edward IV definitely had an interest in alchemy. Thomas Norton, do you remember doing that Thomas Norton episode? It was months and months ago. Thomas Norton was his royal alchemist, and he was in correspondence with George Ripley of Ripley's scroll fame. And also in Edward's reign, touching for the king's evil was reintroduced.
Right, that's for scrofula.
Yes, and it had been a thing under Edward the Confessor, but had fallen out of favour.
And scrofula is goiters, neck goiters, where your neck swells up.
You never see a goiter these days.
But that's because iodine. There's treatment for it now.
Yeah.
But in the past, the king would touch it and it would go away, apparently.
Edward's court was long looked back on as being the occultist court. Rich III used sorcery as a way of condemning his enemies, although he may have believed it too. If he didn't believe it, he was just using it as a weapon, which, I don't know, that sounds a bit below the belt, really, I think.
Yeah, a little.
He accused Elizabeth Woodville of wasting his body through sorcery.
Yes.
Despite the fact he must have had the symptoms of scoliosis long before Elizabeth could have been a threat.
Philippa Gregory went wholeheartedly into that line in her The White Princess and those books. Yeah, they're definitely witches in her books. In her fiction, not her.
Fiction, yeah.
Fiction. That's the one problem with Philippa Gregory, is you order a book thinking it's actually one of her historical books and you get it and it's a novel. Like,
that really annoys me.
Really, really, just make it clear, please, which one's which. Fantasy should be part of the title.
Henry VII's use of Arthurian legend to boost his dynastic credentials encompassed not only chivalry, but also the occult.
Yes, of course. Merlin,
who we discovered disappears in Chapter 2. Even though Polydore Virgil had the barefaced cheek to suggest that none of it was true.
Oh.
We've looked at Henry's book on astrology in the special episode, and it does show that he had more than a passing interest in the subject.
Yeah, so strange.
We know that his court made use of astrologers during the negotiations for the marriage between Arthur and Catherine of Aragon. Until Henry VIII's time, there were no laws against magic, except when it was used to kill the monarch, or to envisage his death. But you'd have thought there'd be laws against killing the monarch anyway, wouldn't you? I mean, Henry VIII brought in legislation in 1542 which banned certain kinds of magic. Magical treasure hunting, harmful magic, love magic, and magical thief detection. And they could now be punishable by death. And I wondered if the love magic was included because he was convinced that Anne Boleyn had bewitched him into marrying her.
He wasn't convinced. They just made it up.
I think he'd be easily convinced about that sort of... Anyway, we'll find out next time.
Yeah.
Prior to that, these things had been considered minor misdemeanours, which would be tried in church courts, and now suddenly they're capital offences. And the reason for this huge change in attitude will be covered in next season when we look at the Reformation. The practice of magic was used to smear the reputations of various people, many of them women. Joan of Arc, Joan of Navarre, that's Henry V's mother-in-law, Jacquetta of Luxembourg, Elizabeth Woodville, Anne Boleyn. But you had to be careful. Using an accusation of sorcery, astrology and necromancy as a political weapon could backfire, since any interest in the subject could lead to counter-accusations of the it takes one to know one variety.
Ah. Oh, yeah.
So, way back about half an hour ago, that was the live, or at least post-death inventory of Thomas Nandyke.
I'm still surprised about the clothes, because he could have gotten a lot of money for those clothes. And if you're that poor that you're selling off things, clothing was one of the quickest things you could do. Interesting. I feel sad for him. You were high up, and then you plummeted.
Unless he chose it.
Possibly.
I would.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to be involved in court at all.
No,
Thank you.
No, and if it meant selling my clothes, not that anyone would buy them, but it meant that, then fine.
Yeah. Very interesting.
Okay.
Thank you for listening.
Goodbye.
Bye.